Melissa, you need to unmute yourself.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me now? I'm so happy to be here and to be talking to you. And before we jump in, I would ask that everyone have something that they can write with and some paper. It could be scrap paper. It could be gridded. It could be something you turned over on your desk. And this is not precious. We're just going to do a couple of things where you will draw. But I will not ask you to show your work if you don't want to. So you just have to know some basic shapes and how to scribble a little bit. So no pressure. I do want to say that I am a licensed professional counselor. I'm not a registered art therapist. I am an artist. I have a bachelor's degree in fine art, and I paint. And I was really fortunate in undergrad to go to a university where they employed an art therapist. And so I took the classes and found that I wanted to be a counselor through taking those classes. But what I want to give you today are some tools and a little encouragement when it comes to art. If you want to dig deeper, I'd encourage you to find an art therapist. This does not require you to be an artist, whether you're the supervisor or the supervisee. This doesn't require an art studio. This is how to welcome drawing and that expression when it comes up in supervision in a way that can be really helpful to you. So we're talking about using this as a tool. This is a way to welcome your supervisees who want to incorporate art or already do. And this came from a really organic place for me because I started keeping an art journal. I had a reflective supervisor, Dr. Stacy Lakey, who became so fascinated that I was working through my thoughts about clients using art. And so I had the experience of having a supervisor who's not an artist find ways to welcome it in and enrich our experience. So a few notes on the ethics of this. You know, as always in supervision, you want to remember that there is a power differential. You are more powerful. You may also be an administrative supervisor. And in that way, allow your supervisees to decline. Allow them to say, well, I doodle things, but I don't want to show you. Remember that there's a vulnerability to it. So this might not be exercises that you want to do in a group, or you might find a way that they fit in a way that you can also let a group meeting in person not share if they don't want to. You treat art with the same respect and privacy you would video. So if you were being trained in reflective supervision, you'd have your own supervisor about that supervision. And they might ask if you'd bring in video. And you might have a supervisee that says, sure, I'll do that. So imagine a piece of artwork is as precious and private as the words you're using in supervision and that video. And this is not something that would be shared with others. So take care of with your words and how you handle that. I'm going to share a list of references later with Gall that we can get to you guys or include with this. That includes, I think, a really succinct article on some of the things that I just said that put them in some really good words with some examples. So again, this is a tool. And we want to work within the scope of our training. So I want to talk first about why we get to where we don't want to make art. Because if any of you work with little kids, you know a 3-year-old will scribble, they'll dance, they might sing, they'll be free with their expression, and we start to change as we get older. We start to lose the thrill of drawing a cat that doesn't look like a cat because we begin to compare those things to other people and what they do. And there's a good book on it called Ish, with a sweet little guy that loves to draw until another child laughs at him. And he begins to learn, I don't have to draw a vase everyone can see as a vase. I'm drawing something vase-ish. And a tree that I draw is a is tree-ish. And as long as it captures that ish, that's his expression. And he begins to love to draw again. And I'm curious about why we lose that great expression of ish. And there are many possible explanations a different training could get lost in. But the example I like the best is penmanship. So when you're little and you first learn to write, you have these big grown-up people in your life, and they're teaching you how to draw the letter B. And if you watch little kids, if you have that experience to watch them learn, they truly begin by drawing. They don't make a straight line and a bubble on the side, and it's a B the first time. They could start anywhere in that example, and all they know is to draw it. And the big people in their life say, no, 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 start like this. And oh, you're not holding your pencil right. You hold your pencil like this. And there are many examples in our lives growing up of that there is a right way to draw a letter. And we become better at it. We grow up a little bit, and our teachers then have us writing words and reading and writing paragraphs. And before we know it, we're doing book reports. And our teacher grades us on not just the content of the words we chose, but if we spelled those words right and the penmanship. And we refine it over years, but we are also teaching ourselves at the same time that there's very wrong things to do with your pen and your pencil. And I think as we're able to grow and develop in that way, we also grow and develop at the same time the ability to compare ourselves to others. And eventually, it becomes something we could be nervous around. So I don't know about you guys, but when I'm in a training and a trainer asks for a volunteer to write on a whiteboard, I start looking down at my paper. I start finding other things to do. I don't want to be the person who volunteers to write. I mean, like, and don't even get me started on spelling. Spelling is the number one reason. If I'm not comfortable laughing at myself for my spelling, I don't want to volunteer to write. And everyone needs to be able to read what I write. And so it takes a minute. There'll be silence for a little while in a training about something like that. And I think despite the practice of the years, we have some nervousness still around those things. And they're all very important, right? As professionals, we can communicate across time and capture our ideas. We want other people to be able to see what we're trying to explain without doing it in person, verbally. And it's important that we have a standard in which we can communicate with each other. But if you open up Word on your computer and you look at how many fonts, you realize there were so many different ways to have written those letters. And somehow, those of us who keep drawing and keep doing expressive arts, dance, singing, poetry, we have kept comfortable with the ishiness of art and re-expanded to realize there's really not a wrong way and a right way. But most people are really nervous. And so with that in mind, I want us to go ahead and get a piece of paper and a writing instrument, and we're going to do a little exercise. And like I said, I don't want to have you guys leave with a fine piece of art. This isn't about how well you draw a line. You just have to know some basic shapes. So on your piece of paper, I'm about to give you instructions. It's for a simple drawing, but I'm gonna go pretty fast. So first, draw a large square. Draw a triangle on top of the square. Inside the square, draw 3 squares and 1 rectangle. Besides the large square, draw 3 circles. Around each circle, draw 5 smaller circles. Now draw a line down from each larger circle. On the other side of your big square, draw a rectangle half as tall as the square. Draw a large circle on top of that triangle. And finally, draw 5 small circles inside the big circle. So is everyone done? It looks like I have people looking up again. So I'm going to show you the drawing that I referenced. That I've practiced this the last 2 weeks. This is precisely, or as accurately as possible, what I told you to do. How many people ended up with a house and a fruit tree and 3 flowers? Some people did. Some people thought it through. There's a few giveaways that you may have immediately thought, well, rectangle on top of a square, it's a pretty standard way even kids draw houses. Or 5 circles around a flower. But there could be a lot of people who just ended up with a whole lot of shapes all over the page. And you're welcome, if you want to hold it up to the camera and talk or show us what you did. But you don't have to. So as I was starting to do telehealth and hadn't had a lot of experience with it, and I needed to find a way to get some kids engaged, I found that this was a really fun game. So the 10-year-old client would pick an object or pick an idea and tell me how to draw it as simple as possible. And the only time we even got close to it was when we were picking animals, or when we'd make a mistake and say something like whiskers and give us the clue. But most of the time we kind of vaguely got to where we were going. So what are some of the possible implications of this when it comes to supervision and reflective supervision particularly? Well, one of it is, what if I had just slowed down? Reflective practice is a slowing down. It's creating some distance, which you can do in art with paper by placing something on a surface outside of you to look at. You can do it with words when you write them down. And distance can be created just with time. And setting with a partner in supervision to reflect back on what it was that happened in your session with a family. And what if I had given you time to rethink your decisions? What if, as you began to realize what I might be asking you to draw, you had had a chance to move those shapes, to play around with them, to see if they fit in a different way? And with a child in therapy, because I'm primarily a child therapist, that could be cutting out shapes and rearranging them to literally alter the story that we just told. And what if I allowed you to know at the very beginning what we were going to draw, and how much easier might it have been to put those things in a satisfying distance from each other, make the house you want to. You might have felt more freedom to tweak things and add more details. And what can happen is you make something that's sort of house-ish if you have enough information to know where you're headed, or if you have enough flexibility to change your mind and rearrange things. And one of the things that reflection does for us is help us handle ambiguity. I don't know what the story is my client is telling me. I'm unsure where my supervisee is heading. Or you're the supervisee and you can't follow what your manager is saying or your clinical supervisor is saying. And you're trying to piece together something with maybe not quite knowing the shape you're going to end up with. The metaphor can work well when it comes to biases too, of a really strong belief in where you're headed that you're not. And I played around with it a little and thought about torturing you guys and decided that was just really not fair for an hour-long training to give you a description that could have ended up in a lot of different endings. A tree, not a house, for example. But we do begin to place things where we think they belong, and we really could be wrong. And so this just illustrates that for us, how reflection helps us slow down, pause for thought, filter information, think about where we fit in the process, what we might want to do differently with our clients, and how our biases may be playing a part. And wondering all the different directions and all the different pathways that this could be heading our work or in our personal lives or withdrawing on a piece of paper. So communication is a living thing. It is something that is interpreted different over time, no matter what the art modality is that you happen to like. There would be a reason why you could pick up a novel written 200 years ago and you need some explanation or footnotes that help you follow what's happening, because it lives in the time in which it's being experienced. I have had some experiences with supervisees that I'm going to share with you in a little bit of a vague way, but I think they illustrate what we're talking about. I have had the experience of having a supervisee who was very afraid of the judgment of art, and very afraid, even when art was not involved, of talking about her work with a client and being judged in a way that would be unfair or stating something in a way that's not quite accurate. And what she needed more than anything was space and permission to misspeak and to really work through the frustration of feeling misunderstood. And she self-chose to use some art to decide to challenge her thought that it could be catastrophic and that she could be deeply judged and that there was a right or wrong way. And part of that was to be able to explore how to do it in a way that didn't mean she had to make a really perfect drawing of the thing she wanted, the ish in vase, not a beautifully rendered three-dimensional vase. But I also have had a supervisee who naturally did it, and I wasn't picking up on it until I finally realized, oh, she doodles in her notes that she brings in. And she has many biases. So you might have a supervisee who, as they begin to tell you a story about their work with a client, you realize, oh, here we go again. She harshly judges women that make those decisions in their life. Or he's used that really pejorative term many times. We've talked about it. What is similar or not about this? And you see them trying to work their way beyond a really stuck point. They've given the same information to their client 10 times. They were excited about the insight that their client suddenly had and came back the next week and didn't have. And they are frustrated beyond a point of being able to look around the situation. And every time with words that you try to choose another path, you can't get there. Well, whether it's art or a sentence written on a piece of paper, sometimes to take the stuck point and put it down in something that's physically in the room. If a Santre therapist were doing a similar presentation to mine, it would work in a similar way. It's there in a physical form in front of us, and it can stay there until I'm ready to pick it up and manipulate it again. And I can explore something around the outside of it. And you can do that physically represented in art by drawing a square on a piece of paper, a big square, and having within that square the stuff you want to contain. And then going ahead and exploring a different subject outside of that square. And we're going to look at that here in another art project in just a second. I'm curious about those beautiful minds that can bullet journal. I may be an artist. I cannot bullet journal. I cannot organize something like that. I don't want to write on the whiteboard because I can't figure out where the bullets go and write it in a way that everyone else looks at it and goes, oh, that makes perfect sense. And in my experience, those more artistically minded supervisees didn't necessarily have a bullet journal experience. So as my supervisee is doodling and drawing things in the margins and drawing these interesting lines around things and connecting things, it looks like a mess, but it looked like my mess. And I thought there's something to it. So I asked her, do you think we could get out a piece of paper and you can draw what you're trying to describe? And here's a good difference between creating something that's like a process note that's going to stay in a file and something that is not. We have in our training, I imagine all of us been asked to write a family tree, a genogram, and use the symbols to represent things. But I don't care if you use the symbol that I know. I only care if you're going to write this out for me and draw it out for me, that it makes enough sense to you, because this isn't precious, doesn't stay. So my supervisee is picking different colors. And I realized, well, she's got a reason why she's picking different colors. And she's got a reason why there's an unhappy face by that person. And so I just encouraged her to use it more and more. We would get into a stuck place. Do you think you can draw it for me? And that drawing for her was her avenue. And I could have been a supervisor that didn't know anything about art, but I invited something into the room that I might have felt uncomfortable with, because in the end, it was that vehicle to take a mirror to her thought literally on a piece of paper. And then suddenly it was organized in the way her mind needed it to be organized in. And she was better able to access her words and to realize and see something she needed to see. So it could be on the same piece of paper or a different piece of paper. I would like for you guys to find a blank side, and I want you to fold it in half. After you've folded that piece of paper in half, looks like some people are still getting their paper. There we go. After you fold that piece of paper in half, on one side of the paper, you are going to scribble. Now, it can be any way you want to scribble. It could be loopy lines that go all the way over themselves over and over again, or it could be straight and jagged. You are on that piece, on that side of that paper, you're going to make scribbles. So go for it. Make scribbles on one side. Okay. On the other side, you're going to make a grid, like a tic-tac-toe board. They could be perfectly straight lines or not. It doesn't matter. You're looking for a grid. So again, in line with there not being a right or wrong, and it being the thing that serves you best, I want you to think about, if I ask you to write some things down, which side is more attractive to you? I need you to make a list. Where do you want to put your list? Do you need it to be on a grid? Because it can be, and that's perfectly fine. Do you need to write it around all the edges of a squiggly circle? That's fine. And it may depend on what I ask you to write. Now, in the spirit of the times in the world we all live in right now, I want you to think about the experience of having the coronavirus pandemic in our world, of self-isolating or not self-isolating, of quarantining, whatever your experience of it was. But I want your focus to be on what you want to keep. Is there something about a different pace of life that became appealing? Did you surprise yourself that you enjoy Zoom parties with your friends? Did you experience something different that you realize you would like to bring forward? And add to that list what you need back. Do you need really badly to be able to drive to the next state where your grandma lives and give her a hug? Do you need to be able to get on a plane because you have a relative in another country and you want to see them face to face so bad? Do you realize your home office doesn't work for you and you really need the building to reopen? What is the thing you want back? Because it could just be you want to go to a restaurant and you want someone else to make your food for you so you can eat it and they can clean it up and you can go home. So it's what you want to keep. These are the positive things. Which side of the paper you got to pick do you want to make this list on? And then start making your list. So that's your job. That's your direction right now. And in case it doesn't go without saying, you can make your list in your scribble. Now I know that some of you need more time and you may have a lot more that you want to say and put on it. And I welcome you to do that later, knowing that we're, a recorded Zoom call. I'm going to cut us a little short than I might otherwise, but I am so curious if there's someone who has experienced any kind of insight from either one of these drawings and that you might want to share some of that with us now.
Well, one thing that the first part of it, what you discovered is I don't have to feel guilty to be alone. How much guilt I have when I have to have time to myself, but now I can have that time to myself because you're supposed to isolate. And I live alone, but I always feel like I need to be running in 900 different directions and really seeing who my friends are. And the thing that I miss is no big surprise to me. I want to be able to fly out to see my grandkids. The first two were kind of a surprise, but the last one's not.
Yeah.
And I chose to write it on my chaos, the scribbles, because that's kind of how I feel a lot of times.
I so appreciate you sharing the word chaos, because this exercise can really be interpreted as a calming of chaos. And it's the way that I have used it with supervisees when they bring in chaotic energy. And it's a parallel to the chaotic energy in the family. To have them list the elements they know are happening in that person's life in a chaotic way, and then try to make some organization out of it. It's just an exercise in getting knee deep and realizing that parallel is happening and recognizing the struggles, and that it's reasonable to struggle if that is the chaos. Is anyone else willing to share? So you could have a very creative mind and you wanted the grid and you did a creative thing with it, or you just needed a list. That's just how you list. It's not a measure of whether it works for you or not. It's an illustration that we need different things to help us organize thoughts, to place them in a way that we can project onto the paper and see maybe what we are projecting onto our clients. And you may want it to be highly organized, and you may not. And having had the experience with a supervisee who needed a paper full of words and then to draw on it to begin to link things like she was making a word cloud and to get herself into that, I didn't need it to make perfect sense to me. It didn't need to be the kind of document that described the client in a way that could go into their file. It was a way for the supervisee to explore her thoughts and her feelings and to begin to realize connections. So if you add another scribble, if you add another grid, or you add more information to it, only this time I ask you to pick out a different aspect of your life, then you can't help but have those two things begin to interact on the page. Whether it's the words or whether it's the drawings or the colors you associate with them, you will visually see them at the same time. And some of us have brains that really need that. We can see clearer when we have that. So in art therapy, there is training around different art modalities. You could have a studio that is your session room that has paint, that has wet clays, or the drier Play-Doh. And there's different reasons to choose different modalities. Sometimes as an art therapist, you're very directive. You have a thing you're going to ask someone to draw or do, and other times you're not. And there are different reasons to choose those things. And that's an exploration that if you would like to have, welcome yourself into that world and look up trainings or take one for yourself or come up with experiences where you reflect on how that feels for you. But when it comes to art in a controlled way, having a pen or pencil on paper doesn't get super messy. It doesn't end up going off the page when you're an adult. If you're 5, you end up coloring off the page. But it's controlled. And if you create an environment in which it's welcomed, then you may be able to get somewhere as a supervisee or a supervisor that expands on your ability to understand your work. And I am not a musician, and I don't create music, but music's a big part of my life and coping. And I have found that sometimes I have a song I associate with a client. And that is a fascinating exploration to have too, why that melody and why those words. And you may have a very musical supervisee. And that could be a way of getting them to think about their client they're stuck with in a different way. Or do you get so upset, so mad at the stuckness with your client that you just want to put on Rage Against the Machine and get some powerful, maybe angry sounding tone behind it, and then it clears out your energy and you have a little more space for your client. And I think if you guys can welcome the expression of it in ways that we were more comfortable with as kids, and can fear being judged as adults. But on that same line, don't worry about judging that expression of your supervisee. A deep therapeutic meaning is not what we're looking for in reflective supervision. All of this is done for the benefit of the client. We are exploring something about the client or something the client brings up in the therapist. And if it begins to become something that is therapist focused, your supervisee, you're beginning to see that there's an issue. Or as a supervisor, you realize this is bringing up an issue in yourself, then that moves into the realm of therapy. And that would move for us into the realm of, if art were to be used, it would need to be an art therapist. So if the tool is bringing out something difficult for you or your supervisee that is affecting the client, then it has a really precious place in a supervisory relationship. Reflecting on positive and negative. Why do you so particularly like this family, but you don't really don't like this other one? And exploring what that brings up in you, and having that in a safe space where, if you are a person who needs to write it out or draw it out or listen to the music that helps bring that out in you, that you're allowed to bring that into a safe supervisory space. So I'm realizing Gal is watching my time, but I'm trying to watch my time too. And I want to end by giving you guys some ideas of how reflection, why it works so well in expressive arts, and why it can be so important to bring in that part of you or your supervisee. So our profession, whether we're a speech pathologist, a counselor, a social worker, and I apologize, I had meant to ask what everyone's profession was at the beginning, but regardless of what it is, we set goals. We have a purpose to what we're doing. We're trained in models. Our clients come in with a goal, an issue that they need help with. We generate case notes. We write a treatment plan. If you work at all in the court systems, as I used to with DHS cases, you learn to write for a judge and attorneys and write court reports for them. This gets into the realm of being very analytical, very, very logical. What did you observe with your own eyes and hear with your own ears? What did you physically do? What did they physically do? Reflection helps us also see the things we may have picked up on that we didn't even think about in the note. A gut feeling, because our senses took it in, but we just haven't put it into words yet. And art doesn't require words. Art can be a symbol that means something to you and doesn't mean anything to anybody else, but it helps capture something that's a little bit elusive, lets you start to analyze it and see if anything is there, which is what reflective practice helps us do. So considering all the implications of whatever our interventions are, whatever the goal of them happen to be, can have a place in art, can help illuminate that we, as the professional, when we walk into a room with a family, bring our biases into that. Whether it's because we really like them and it's a joy, or because we were secretly hoping they were going to cancel that day because we don't have the energy for all of that. And we bring that in with us and it affects the things that happen. And if we can explore possibilities outside of that, and we can bring in art, it can also be a place to look at it again later. And it's not a piece of, like I said, their case notes, but as a process note that you will not keep forever and ever, as something that you need to walk away from and look back at. Art can be super powerful for that. It's there. It doesn't change between now and then. If you come back and see something different, then it illuminated something different for you. And in that way, if you wanted to keep a journal without, a protected health information in it, but as your response to that day and your response as a therapist, sometimes it can illuminate a pattern over time. And that pattern over time can tell you something about your work and reflect on when it felt better for you or it didn't. And the same happens in a reflective supervisory experience. And so if you're the supervisor and you're feeling stuck, it's very hard to work with your supervisee and you are trying to figure out why. You could use this for yourself as well. You could have a word in mind. It could begin with the letter Z. You could pick black because, oh my gosh, like you need a thick black Z on that piece of paper. You can put it in a file, in a drawer. You can slam the drawer shut. You can get out of your body some things that you need to get out of your body. Go back, take out that piece of paper, and change the focus. Start thinking about what goes well in supervision with the person I am so stuck with. What can I give myself some credit for? I'm still trying. Is there, a question I want to ask, and I've got to find the right way to ask it where it's kind and compassionate and reflective, and I can get there. So this can work for you too. And that we don't have time to be one of those lovely books of lots and lots and lots of ideas. They are out there, and you can find the ones that may be appealing to you, of art therapy source books and cookbooks of things that you might want to try. But if you do decide to go down that path, look for that. Look for opportunities to interact with art therapists. Consider whether this is the path you want to take. But don't think if you're not an artist and you're not an art therapist that you can't invite that into sessions or use it in your own way. Just like you do not have to be a calligrapher to write a paragraph. You don't have to be a fine artist to use that kind of self-expression. Okay. Well, that's what I have. And I'm curious if you guys have questions or comments, and I welcome them.
Thank you, Melissa. We will give them a few seconds to see if they have questions. So we invite you to write in the chat, or you can open the mic. That would be great also.
I am curious if you have a chance at feedback, anonymous feedback, about how this went, if this was what you expected. This is my first time presenting in this format and the information in this way. And so I am curious if it is what you expected or if you needed something different.
Yes, Melissa, we have some feedback from Brianna Tracy, and she says, thanks so much, Melissa. I wish I had these ideas to use when I was mentoring interns in the past.
Oh, yeah.
Also, there is a question, is there a slideshow of what you said that we would receive?
You know, I didn't write a slideshow. I thought it would be more interesting to have the experiential parts of it, but I did write an outline of a script for myself that I would be happy to bullet point and share along with a list of some resources that you could look up if you're interested in more information.
All right, thanks. There's some more feedback. I was not sure what to expect. This was wonderful and helpful to have additional tools for processing. That would be wonderful. To share I think what they mean is to share the PowerPoint presentation.
Okay, so do we have any more questions, or we can say goodbye? And thanks for Melissa.
There's a comment from Michal, you gave me great ideas, thank you. Some other comments, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, so thank you, Melissa, for this unique session. It was different and it was wonderful.
Thank you.
There is also something in your voice that made me so calm suddenly. Seriously. This is why you are a therapist, I think. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for this session, and thank you all for joining us, and I will forward you the materials that I will get from Melissa. Okay. So have a great afternoon, have a great weekend, and we have one more lecture tomorrow, so you can see in our link and join us if you would like. Thank you, Melissa.
You're welcome.